Inside of you are two wolves. The first wants to be James Bond, and the second hates the government, and especially the CIA. Intelligence, spying, it's a necessary part of any functioning government, but also full of moral hazard. Probably the most morally hazardous part of the government. But spycraft is an ancient art. The ancient Egyptians used spies to control and expand the empire. The Greeks used spies. The Romans, the Aztecs. Sun Tzu writes of spies. There are spies in the Bible. Moses sends 12 spies into Canaan to scout out the promised land. Joshua sends 2 spies into Jericho, which is the famous story of Rahab. And spycraft has been with our country since the Revolution. George Washington is often referred to as the nation's first spy master because of the Culper Ring, the nation's first spy ring made of military officers and civilians who transmitted information about the British through coded messages, dead drops, and ciphers. But spying requires secrecy, and secrecy is well too often the enemy of self-government. I mean, just ask President Donald Trump. He knows a thing or two about how the intelligence apparatus can be weaponized against a man and against a movement. And we've become all too acquainted with the operations of the deep state over the last 10 years. And on that point, the deep state probably agrees. And it's led the American people to ask a bunch of questions about the intelligence community's role in our history, from things like Watergate to foreign wars in Iraq to political assassinations like JFK. And they're legitimate questions because if there were people willing to weaponize the government to cook up some absurd Russiagate plot, all because a political candidate wanted to deport illegal aliens, then what else were they willing and able to do? JFK wanted to break the intelligence community into smithereens, and then he ends up dead? Nixon wanted to go after the deep state, and then Watergate happened? Bob Woodward, who broke the Watergate story, who got hired at the Washington Post without a journalism background or journalism experience that would qualify him for that job. Oh, he has an intelligence background. Okay. And we still don't have many satisfying answers to all these questions. It really comes down to, is our shared political reality actually reality? That's the question that's foremost on everyone's minds, aside from all the different rabbit holes we go down. And the fundamental questions are raised too. These are fundamental political questions like who rules? Again, we don't have all the answers, but in the meantime, the American people have made some pretty simple requests. We want the U.S. to be good at spying, but please don't spy on us, obviously. You spy on your enemies. If you're spying on the American people, well, what's that supposed to mean? And we want accountability for abuses. We want at least some kind of transparency. Easier said than done in Washington, I know. But today, the United States is locked in an escalating intelligence war. An intelligence war, an info war, fought with spies instead of ships, computer code instead of cannons. Emerging threats, artificial intelligence. The game is changing rapidly. Keeping up is the real challenge. Perhaps what's been one of the more surprising things you might have noticed as of late is how often the CIA or other countries' spy agencies, Mossad, MI6, the FSB, have been in the headlines, but especially the CIA. And one of the more remarkable moments of this presidency, President Trump just came out in October of 2025, a few months before the U.S. operation removed Maduro, and he just came out and said, yeah, the CIA is engaged in covert operations inside Venezuela. Yeah, they're helping us target the boats. What candor. And the CIA has also been very involved in the Iran war now, right? Other intelligence agencies too, Mossad. But the CIA was reportedly working to get the Iraqi Kurds to invade Iran. Mossad reportedly was working to foment an uprising against the Iranian regime. And all the while, these intelligence agencies are assessing Iranian capabilities, the Iranian nuclear program, and are very often coming to very different conclusions. And then there's China, America's #1 geopolitical, geostrategic rival. They're spying on the United States constantly. Just this week, a Democrat mayor in California, Democrat Eileen Wang, resigned her mayorship of Arcadia, California, and admitted to acting as an illegal foreign agent of China between 2020 and 2022. She allegedly was working with the PRC on boosting fake news Chinese propaganda. Wow. And meanwhile, the CIA is reportedly trying to get Chinese military officials to flip on Xi Jinping after a shakeup in the Chinese military. And of course, President Trump and Xi Jinping are meeting in Beijing. So the spy wars are intensifying. And to make sense of all of this is Mike Baker. He's going to be joining the podcast week. He is a former CIA covert operations officer, and he's the host of the President's Daily Brief podcast, which I listen to every day. Gives you 3 stories really quickly on what's going on in the world. 3 stories that might end up in the President's Daily Intelligence Briefing. So there's no one more qualified to talk about this than Mike Baker, and we hope you enjoy. Before we get into this week's interview on the Signal Sit Down, ring that bell to get notifications on future Signal Sit Down content. Hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you may be joining us. And then while you're at it, please leave us a 5-star review and comment who you'd like to see on a future episode of the Signal Sit Down. Remember, it's your government. It's your country. And together, we're taking it back. Without further ado, here's the interview. Mike Baker, welcome to the Signal Sit Down.
Thank you very much.
I'm very excited to have this conversation with you because you are in my podcast diet. The President's Daily Brief is one of my favorite podcasts in my morning routine. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out. It is you are going to get 3 big stories happening around the world, the type of stories that end up in the President's Daily Intelligence Briefing.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it very much. It's great. We love doing it. There's a really good, solid team behind it. Mm-hmm. Remember that toy, the wind-up monkey that would bang the cymbals together?
Yeah.
I'm the wind-up monkey. But there's some really smart people that are behind the whole thing that put it together. That's great.
And you're a little qualified to do that because you are a former CIA covert operations officer.
I thought you were going to say I was a wind-up monkey for the CIA. Well, kind of.
I should have clarified that at the top. Yeah. But you have a background in intelligence. This is not somebody who's just trying to read the tea leaves. This is somebody who's been on the inside, helping inform people on what these products look like, on how these operations actually work. And so, first and foremost, talk about your background. How did you become a CIA covert operations officer? Is that something that you wanted to do when you were growing up?
No. In fact, I still have I think it was a 2nd grade, maybe 3rd grade essay where they told you to write about what you wanted to be when you grew up. And I, like just about every other kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. Mm-hmm. And then if I wasn't an astronaut, I wanted to be a police officer. So I was just very standard, right? That's what I wanted to do. I was convinced. And then after about 6th grade, I realized I was nowhere near smart enough to be an astronaut. It just wasn't going to happen. But I got very fortunate with the agency and met some really good people. And they saw, I guess, something in me. It wasn't necessarily book smarts. I was not an academic. So I'm going to point that out right away. I did not do well. I worked my way through college, enjoyed every minute of it, but wasn't a rocket scientist. But they saw other things, and I think a lot of times the agency and the operations side, what they're looking for is discipline, self-starters, an ability to just adapt, right? So field expediency, however you want to put it. I'd had a fair amount of overseas experience and had some ability to learn languages. So there were certain elements that I think they saw, okay, let's take a flyer on this guy and see if it works. And I was very fortunate in that regard because I had a great time. I am one of those people that always speaks very highly of it because I had a great experience, met some wonderful folks. And I, to this day, talk to a lot of young people about who approach or just for whatever reason I'm talking to them about careers. And I always say the same thing. If you are curious, if you're just got a modicum of interest in what's going on overseas, if you're disciplined, it is an amazing career opportunity. And so I'm a big booster for the organization. No surprise. I know some people get out and they seem to have an axe to grind, and whether it was because they didn't get enough hugs or they didn't feel they were listened to enough. I spent all my time out on the streets, basically. I was in the operations side, whole time overseas, never did a headquarters tour. And so I never imagined that I was changing the world. I imagined I was doing whatever task I was told to do. And I think you have to be an independent sort of person. You have to like to work on your own. And you also have to be good at working in a team, because there's opportunities on both sides there. But I never thought to myself, well, what I'm doing right now, this needs to be given to the 7th floor. The director needs to hear from me. No, he doesn't. They're getting information and intelligence, and they're from a variety of sources, right? Liaison partners, SIGINT, they're pulling all this information in. We're a cog in that whole thing, right? We're out on the street, we're collecting intelligence, or we're doing whatever the job may be, paramilitary operations or counter-narcotics, counter-terrorism operations. And so I think I enjoyed it because I never imagined, right, that somehow they should listen to me, right? I'm doing my job. Then I'll do my job. Then you give me another job, right? And then you just keep going. And so that's why I think I did well, or hopefully they think I did well, because I enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you said, they're going to take a bit of a flyer on this guy, you showed some natural ability to do things that are necessary to fulfill that job, to do that role well. But I mean, how do you even, like, for anyone listening out there who might be interested in becoming an intelligence officer or go working at the CIA, like, how do you even start to have that conversation of like, actually, I want to be a spy. I want to be.
Yeah.
Like,
well, that's a good question.
How do you does somebody approach you? Do they have a large black fedora on and a trench coat?
Yeah.
Like,
They knock on your door one day, and
they kidnap you from your family, erase all your family photos.
That's right. Well, the funny thing is, all the schools that I went to have been shut down. So, like, friends of mine, they assume that was the reason why.
Erasing all trace.
Elementary school, the pre-K, junior high, high school, they've all closed in the past. And so, I think nowadays it's so much easier, right? If you are interested in a career in the intelligence community, whether it's the agency or any other element in the outfit or in the community, it's so much easier to get in touch with somebody, right? You can do it online. Right? That's how most people do. They go online, as strange as it sounds to people, from my era, and you can apply. Now the problem is the application process sometimes scares away really good candidates, right? Because it can take time. It's still the government, right? It's a small bureaucracy within the government, but it's still a government operation. So the process of applying can take a long time, and that can frustrate people because you got to have a job, right? And so they'll get other opportunities, and you're getting a lot of Type A people applying, and they've got other options, right? But maybe they're patriotic to the point where I would love to do this, but after a year or so, of not hearing much or just kind of slowly grinding through that process, they have to make a choice, right? So they do lose some people because of the length of time the application can take, but that's one way. Other ways, we still do. The agency still does campus, tours. Mm-hmm. So they still go out there and they talk to young folks and people in graduate schools and try to say, look, if you're at all interested in being the pointy edge of the spear, whether you're in operations or the DI side, the intelligence side of things, the analytical side. The administrative section is very important. The S&T, engineers, scientists, the science and technology group within the agency has done remarkable things for generations. Right? Some of the innovations that they've created that have then gone into the public domain, right, are astounding. Right? And so there's a lot of different places for people to land within the agency. It's not just the operations group. Mm-hmm. I just happen to be partial towards that.
Well, talk to me a little bit about that filtration mechanism, right? I mean, if you see the listing on Indeed for "Do you want to be a spy?" which is hilarious. Like hilarious to think about. It might be real actually, and then you apply, and then there's some type of filtration mechanism. For your experience, like how did you think they said, "We want you to be out in the field. We want you to be a covert operation"?
Well, I think you have to. I mean, you have to be kind of clear about what your interests are. You also have to be clear about what your abilities are, what your limitations are. Right? It was clear that I was not going to be in the science and technology group as a smart guy, or even, in fact, in the DI, in the intelligence group, with all the analysts, the writers sit, really smart people who do actually put together what's known as the President's Daily Brief. Then, so. But from an operations perspective, look, if you like people, if you find things interesting, if you're curious, if you enjoy being overseas, if you if you thrive on sort of I don't want to say a lack of structure, but a kind of a lack of structure in terms of what you're going to be dealing with, right? You just don't know, right? From one day or 1 week to the next.
If you like the unpredictable, if you don't like doing a job, that's what I love about my job is I never ever live the same day twice.
Right, and that's you're saying it much better than I was saying.
No, it's something that I tell people all the time about journalism. It's like, especially for young journalists at the beginning of their careers, it's like if you are having a bad time in this job, we need to have a conversation because something's not working. Because you get to wake up every morning and tell people exactly what you think, and not only tell people, like people back at home, you get to tell the most powerful people in the world exactly what you think about them. Yeah. And if you have a hard time, like if you think that's boring, we need to have a conversation. Right. And it doesn't. Sadly, on the journalism side, we don't get to dictate our own schedules. Same thing probably on the intelligence side, because you guys have to respond to emerging threats and respond quickly. But for us, it's responding to what the president just put on Truth Social or what the Secretary of State is doing.
Does he use Truth Social? I don't know. Does he use social media? It's hard to tell.
Does he do anything big on there? Does he just post pictures of his grandkids?
Cute cat videos.
Yeah, that's how you you have to be flexible and respond to that environment. And
ultimately, if with the agency from an operations perspective, if you're not a self-starter, if you don't thrive in a changing environment, and if you also, in a way, if you need a lot of hugs, right? If you need a lot of pats on the back, you're not going to get it there, right? That's not going to be. You also don't do it for the money. When I started, we were doing some pretty wacky things. I think I was making $17,000 a year, and we'd look at each other and we go like, wow, but we didn't care, right? Because you were trading off for doing something that was so unique and interesting, right? And still to this day, it's the same way. I mean, the people at the outfit are just. Again, I know people are going to say, well, what else are you going to say? Or, it's rose-colored glasses, or you're just, but it's absolutely true, right? And it kind of, it set me up without me knowing it. It set me up for, a second career down the road, way down the road. I mean, I was there for about 20 years. So, but I learned things there at the agency in operations that really made a difference in terms of then going into private business, right? Without knowing that I was learning those things. So I'm always grateful.
Transferable skills. And so you have these proclivities, you go through this sorting mechanism, you need to be able to be kind of a self-starter, independent, respond to the environment as it's presented to you, kind of trust your gut. Like there's no education that can prepare you to be a CIA covert operations officer. Like, how do you get good at that job? Is it just exposure? Is it is there training on the inside?
There's a lot of training. Yeah, there's a lot of training before you ever get sent out. Yeah, right.
Because it's not like something where they can just be like, "Here's our curriculum." Go
to
an
online course.
Do it online. Yes, go to your university professors in the political science department and beg and plead for them to have a CIA or an intelligence community class. Like you need to learn.
Yeah. I mean, there are college courses. I mean, in the intelligence cycle, and there's certainly there's a psychological element to it, depending on what you're doing within the operations directorate. If you're a traditional case officer, for instance, and your job is to go out and spot and assess and eventually recruit assets, right? there's a big psychological element there, right? But again, that kind of comes down to there's some fundamentals. You got to like people. If you don't like people, right, you can't your way through that world, right? It's just not going to happen, right? People will sense it, right? So the best, the best officers that I know and knew genuinely liked people, and as bizarre as it sounds, genuinely cared about the assets that they were dealing with or that they were recruiting, right? Which sounds odd, right? Because it's a very mercenary business in a way, right? You're asking people to put their lives on the line in a lot of cases, right? And you're asking them to do something that is, by its very nature, debilitating. Right? As soon as you ask somebody and recruit somebody to spy on their country, right? Betray their country, now we look at it and go like, well, yeah, but they're betraying a horrible regime, right? For instance, or a dictatorship, right? So, okay, that part I have no angst about, right? But what I'm saying is, underneath all of that, no matter what government they're coming from, there's still this element where the window starts closing, right? Because they start decaying, because they're for one reason or another, you just know there's an eventual end to that. Right?
Yeah, they have a family.
Yeah.
That country is their people still. Of
yeah.
course there's going to be, and this is like where pop culture kind of meets the real world, where so often you see in depictions of CIA officers cultivating sources that there's like this really cold, callous, it's strictly either blackmail or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the end of the day, the CIA officer, as funny as it sounds, I'm probably going to get dragged for this. The CIA officers are people too.
Well, they are people too. Yeah. You are going to get dragged for that. Yeah. They're going to clip that out, and that's going to go crazy.
And you're going to, but you end up in a situation where it's like impossible for you to just totally dismiss these people. If you're not a psychopath, you have cultivated them. And they are kind of your responsibility.
Oh, no, they're definitely your responsibility. Look, I've dealt in cases where, you know their family, right? Or you know their kids. And so, so fundamentally, you know that what you're asking them to do is, again, I don't want to be too touchy-feely here, because a lot of times it is in their best interest, their immediate best interest, right, to do this. And in the long term, it's in the best interest of the people they're surrounded by, right? Because again, they're existing in a horrible regime, a repressive regime, whatever it may be. And so in those cases, it's not a problem. At least, again, I never had a problem with angst. I knew officers who did. They'd sit around and question sort of the moral aspects of it all. And I'm thinking, like, I am not going to sit around and worry about that, right? You tell me what to do, I'm going to do it. So that was another reason why I think I enjoyed the job. But the point being is that you have to. There has to be a certain level of empathy or compassion. And whether that's just because you could say, well, that's nice, that's a good thing. You can also argue that, well, yeah, that's important because it helps you better evaluate your asset or the person that you're dealing with, right? You've got a better read on them, right? In terms of little things like, are they starting to break down a little bit, right? Is this now becoming a bit of a counterintelligence problem? Is it a security problem? Because now maybe they're getting a little sideways with what they're doing. Maybe they start talking to their spouse, right? Or to a friend, or to, God forbid, their boss or whomever. So you have to be able to read people that way. And again, there's a very, I'm not arguing, there's a very mercenary element to it. But it's also a very critically important thing. And it's important that we are very good at it. In fact, it's important that we're the best at it, because I tell you what, we don't live in a community of nations where we're all holding hands, right? There's a lot of hostile elements and nations out there that do not have our interests at heart. So I have no problems with saying we better be good at these things, and we better be better than they are.
And I think the fundamental tension for young men on the right is they grow up wanting to be James Bond, but they also hate the government. And so you have, you have, given what you just laid out there, what the job actually entails, like there is tons of myths and facts layered on top of each other through American pop culture, through international pop culture, right? You were talking about James Bond or the Jason Bourne movies, and oh, that's so cool, that's so badass, I want to do that. And at the same time, like the other side of it is what's the HBO, like The Americans, right? Like the darker like the darker CIA intelligence community shows, right?
Those things.
Tell us a little bit about the place that the intelligence community and the CIA kind of hold in American life. And, as someone who lived it, how do you read that? How do you make sense of, I guess, the zeitgeist's interpretation or like read on things that actually happen in the intelligence world?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I will say it's painful to hear people about the agency in terms of, we have to just tear it down, right? Because it's, oh my God, it's so political, right? And it's it's working against the interests of the country. And I'm thinking, well, what are you talking about, right? I mean, the agency is, and I know, again, I'll get dragged for this if that's how the kids put it, but it is it's an apolitical organization. Now, having said that, it's also a human organization. So have there been instances where typically somebody very senior has gotten too political or too enamored of their relationship with the president, right? And the answer is yes, that's happened, obviously, right? So, the typical example would be John Brennan as an example, right? Now, John Brennan is a very, very smart guy, right, with a lot of experience. But do I think he allowed his political interests or his political leanings, right, to come into play when really the ideal situation is you shouldn't be able to read where that person is on a political spectrum, right? And if you're in a senior position in the agency or really any position, but ops officers on the street, nobody gives they don't care, right? But what I remember when I was in, we never talked politics. We'd be sitting in some safe house somewhere waiting for something to pop, and you'd never sit around and chat politics. Nobody cared, right? It didn't matter. But so I take exception when people say the agency, right? Just like I do with the Bureau, right? I know a lot of FBI guys, and they're top-notch, absolutely the best. So you have to make a distinction between, gotta just destroy the institution, right, and start over again. I'm thinking, I don't think that's a good idea. I've seen that happen in fourth world countries, right? Every time there's this change in government, everybody goes swept out, and then they bring their own people in. And then the next thing, you got another government change, and that happens again. Now, nobody wants that, right? So you have got to always strive to have a very apolitical, and to the degree possible, transparent intelligence apparatus for your country. And again, sometimes it's more successful than others. I'm not, and all this is. I'm not saying that the agency hasn't made mistakes, right? They'd be the first to say, yeah, we've had some missed calls, but at the same time, we like again, maybe your life. Your views obviously are shaped by your life experiences, right? Mm-hmm. And mine tell me that it's a very aggressive world out there, right? And so we better hope that we have a very effective intelligence community, right? So,
well, I want to ask you about the effectiveness in just a second, but one follow-up I have on this is how you mentioned it's a human organization, but it's also supposed to be apolitical. Mm-hmm. And there is, as you said, like it needs to be effective, but also transparent to the extent that is possible. Those political missteps, in particular, the political missteps surrounding the president from the years, 2015 through 2018, right. That I think is the biggest stain on the intelligence community from the Republican perspective. Sure. There has been a number of different pushes, whether it's the FISA stuff or it's trying to make some part of the budget transparent. Like, how do you sensibly create the transparency needed to hold the agency accountable? Yeah. Right? Like I know that I'm not a dreamer. I'm not assuming that everything in the CIA's budget's not going to be going to be disclosed to the public. That would be silly. Yeah. We see that in the Federalist Papers, even that the executive branch needs secrecy and dispatch. Washington knew a few things about spies and
look,
cultivating
yeah.
sources.
Yeah,
So I'm not
some of the earliest entries in Treasury were for payment of spies.
right. So I'm not some like dreamer who says everything can be transparent. I know that there has to be some type of secrecy here, but how do you actually make sure that the deep state doesn't act out in that way again, and doing that through some transparency mechanisms?
Well, yeah. First of all, there is a well-worn path between Langley agency headquarters and Capitol Hill, with the briefers going back and forth to the various committees up there. So first of all, you need. It's probably going to sound like I'm passing the buck here from the intel community to the politicians, but you need very inquisitive, very objective, right? I was going to say nonpartisan, but that's never going to happen.
You need oversight.
You need oversight. Yeah. And so, and it starts with the intel committees, right? And there is a little bit of a game that gets played in Washington where they'll act shocked over something that's become public when they knew it all along because they've been briefed on it, right? And they were aware of it. And but yet they'll express, surprise and go, "Oh my God, really?" And you're thinking like, you're on the intel committee. You're getting briefed all the time, and you have the right to be briefed, and you have the right to ask questions. So first stop is right there, right? It has to happen there with an inquisitive, curious, smart, ideally nonpartisan group of politicians who do their best to the degree possible to keep things as transparent as possible.
I'm sorry to interrupt you right here. I know you have more on this, but really quickly, do you think that it has been too often the case that members of Congress roll over when they are presented with these challenges? Or like, what is the incentive structure? What is wrong about that incentive structure where you don't see the aggressiveness and oversight that you would like to see?
Well, I think it's just politics, right? It depends on. Do I think that it's impacted by the individual committee members' willingness to ask questions or to be tough and demand answers based on who's in charge? Yeah, sure, of course, right? So, do I also think there's an element of they might be in over their heads? And I don't think we send necessarily always, that's not true in all the cases, but the best and brightest to Washington. And we send some of the non-best and brightest and let them stay up there for 48 years, right? So I think that's a problem. But I think that, and then part of it is from in terms of how do you create that transparency, you can't really, you don't want an organization to self-police as the front line of defense, right? So, yes, the agency, I think, again, I'm subjective, but they do a very good job, right, in terms of trying to keep within the organization the understanding that it doesn't matter who's in the White House, right? You're going to get your priority taskings. You're going to go out and do them, and then you're going to respond. Where it goes or can go sideways is when it gets out from, I don't know how you want to call it, the street level, the collection of intelligence, whether it's a SIGINT or whether it's the human intelligence or whatever you're gathering, liaison intel, and then once it starts getting into that washing machine, right, where it starts getting pushed and pulled and combined with other sources of information, right? And then it starts getting massaged as it makes its way to the NSC or to the White House for advisors or for the policymakers to look at. That's an editorial process. You know that far better than most people, right? So you can't keep opinion out of it.
And that is where, like, whether we're talking Screwball or we're talking Steele dossier or any of the other Russia collusion stuff, it was that process. Yeah. That is where, what we call the deep state often rears its ugly head, is that there's somebody who either can't keep their emotions in check or somebody who wants to be a political actor but shouldn't have that role.
Shouldn't have that role because, and for whatever reason, because again they get enamored with their relationship with somebody in the White House or whatever it might be. But it is that editorial process where things start to get wonky, and if you just take the raw intelligence in whatever form it comes in, right, it is what it is. It's what you're collecting, right? You're not making an editorial decision about it. You're collecting a piece of intelligence and you're saying, here you go. Well, now it starts moving through that system, right? And again, that's where by the time it gets to a president's daily brief, or by the time it gets to, it's gone through a lot of iterations, right? What do we leave in? What do we take out? How do we phrase this, right? And there's a lot of power in that, right? And we've seen that, and you're right, that period of time. Look, if anybody had asked anybody on the street about steel, we would have told you. What are you're basing a thing on this what a waffle, right? And so I'm sorry, I'm not even sure if I could talk that way.
It's all right, we got it.
Okay, all right. So, so if you had asked, anybody in operations who had any dealings, that might have been a helpful thing, right? You could argue the same all the way back to WMD, right? And that sole sourced intel. So, but that's, again, for what it's worth, from my perspective, that's where a lot of things go wrong. And like you said, somebody with an agenda, somebody with motivation, whatever, touches that product, and then the next thing you know, the finished product, is in a certain slant or direction.
You mentioned before it's really important for the U.S. to continue to be the best in this business despite all of the problems. Give us a breakdown of the geostrategic breakdown of where the intelligence capacities sit for respective powers, right? You've seen, the CIA has been a issue of really live controversy for decades in American politics.
Has it? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, it feels particularly tense right now, especially as we're not only right now as in this current era of Trump politics, but also we have FISA reauthorization that needs to be done in 45 days, right?
Yeah.
The United States, Israel, of course, is always in this conversation. China increasingly making moves on U.S. home soil for its intelligence community, its intelligence capacities. Russia, the Brits, the French, these are all the kind of major players in the intelligence game.
Yeah.
How do you see the relative capacities in that space?
Well, you've named all the heavy hitters, right? Look, in terms of, again, you have to kind of discount, my list, because obviously I'm subjective, but I still put the agency CIA up at the top in terms of capabilities, in terms of resources, ability to act, ability to adapt. But that's what people would expect. So let's set that aside. China, they throw a tremendous amount of resource at this, right? Their PLA, Intel apparatus, the MSS, and others. In terms of cyber shenanigans, right, they're at the top of the heap. In terms of what they engage in the theft of intelligence, and their efforts to map out our infrastructure, for example, and for that, hopefully not going to arrive, but for the next big global conflict, just like a pandemic, I'm sure we're going to have one. They spend a ridiculous amount of time understanding the weaknesses and attack points within our infrastructure. Everything, water treatment, transportation hubs, cash movement, refineries, doesn't matter. They're mapping it all out because they want a playbook. Right? Next big global conflict, if it were to happen, then between us and them, the goal is to bring the pain to the homeland as quickly as possible. Right? So you shut things down. Then you see what a mess it is when there's power goes out for 3 days. People lose their minds, right? It's like Night of the Living Dead out there. So, you get a shutdown of a significant period of time, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. You're not moving fuel, you're not moving pharmaceuticals, cash isn't moving. People, they're going to feel that pain.
Right. How many people have cash on hand to last them 6 weeks if the ATM machine goes down?
Yeah. If you do, send me a note. Let me know.
Yeah.
Include your address.
Yeah.
No, don't actually do that. So, but the point is, and China also, their advantage is, and people talk about it all the time, so it's no surprise. It's sort of the long view that they maintain, right? They're willing to invest in just a single intel asset, an individual. They're willing to invest decades and decades to get that person someplace where they can provide good intelligence. They work very hard in terms of the theft of intellectual property, and it has cost the U.S. and our allies. You can't put a figure on it in terms of the dollar value that it's cost us, number of jobs, opportunity costs in research and development, and we've made attempts in the past. I think it was President Obama and Xi standing next to each other, and Obama talking about how Xi's promised not to engage in any more cyber shenanigans. What a load of crap that was, right? So he doubled down, and they're never going to change. So Trump is going to go out there. He'll meet with Xi on the 14th, and I would love nothing more than for President Trump. And if we've ever had a president that's going to do this, you would think it would be President Trump, to say, all right, Xi, are you going to stop this with the theft of economic intelligence and research and development, proprietary information? When are you going to stop? And maybe dump a couple of case studies on them, recent case studies where they've been engaged in this sort of activity, and really, really push it. Mm-hmm. Who cares if Xi gets upset, right? He should get upset. Push him on something like that, right? But I suspect it's going to be more collegial than that.
Yeah. It'll be probably more collegial, especially with the context of the Iran war. And, of course, Chinese intelligence is involved in that too.
Absolutely.
But
yeah.
Of course, China is a secondary player when we think about that region right now. It's the United States, it's Israel, it's Iran, it's Russia, China. You can say those kind of secondary players. They're providing targeting information. That's more military to military, less so intelligence.
Well, I think but it's critical intelligence.
Oh, of
right?
course.
And it's allowing the Iranians to be more lethal in their targeting. Mm-hmm. And it is, I would argue, I think they're more than just a second-tier player in that region. I mean, I think because of the potential impact they could have on Iran in terms of shifting them off of their current position. But again,
yes, if China and Russia decided to go all the way, go in, then we're talking about their top-tier players for sure. But just generally in the news cycle, we're talking about what is the U.S. and Israeli capabilities versus that of the Iranians. And some of their supporters. And it obviously, Israel is famous for its intelligence capabilities. The Mossad is world over known for good and for ill.
They're extremely capable. They're also a small operation. Mm-hmm. That gives them some real advantage. They're also facing an existential threat on a daily basis, from their perspective, and that also gives them an advantage, right? You've got a sense of urgency, right, and a certain sense that we have no other option here. It also gives you a little bit more ability in terms of being aggressive, right, as they clearly can be. But they've been at it, their entire existence as a state. So you can't. They are extremely good at what they do. There's no doubt about that. And they've been steadfast partners, right? So, do they have different objectives now? Sure. Yeah, they've got. I think clearly we've started to diverge in terms of what our interests are at this stage, to some degree. Obviously, there's still concern over the nuclear program, but I think we make the mistake sometimes as a country of giving another country, party hats and training and other stuff, and thinking they're going to move in lockstep with us, right? And forgetting that, rightly so, every nation acts in its own best interests. Right? That's just the way it's going to be. And sometimes those interests align. That's terrific. Sometimes they don't.
Right.
And we just have to understand that. But I've seen cases in years past where the U.S. government seemed confused over operations we were engaged in with other countries, where they say, yeah, but we're giving them all this money and we're giving them training and we're doing all this, but now they're doing, and you're thinking, well, I'm sorry, but first of all, it's a different country and they have some different interests. It's a different culture, so they're going to process things differently. So I do think sometimes the U.S. government, elements of it, have a hard time understanding that.
And it's for some reason, especially since the war in Iran began, like talking about that is verboten for some reason. Like if you even point out that, yes, of course, Israel remains a key geostrategic partner in the region for the United States, but the interests do diverge.
Yes.
And we actually know that from what's been publicly reported about the intelligence assessments.
Right. Yeah.
You're raked over the coals and saying, you're leaning into Looney Tunes land. It's like, no, not at all. We have known from the beginning that the Israeli intelligence assessments of Iran, of its nuclear capabilities, of the nature of its regime, of its missile capabilities, has been different, not completely night and day different, but has been different than the U.S. assessment. So my question for you is, now that we're 40 some odd days in this war, longer than that now. I don't even know how long we're 70 days into this war. How do you read the Israeli assessment versus the U.S. assessment? And on the practical side, when there are differences of opinion with a geostrategic partner, how do you work through that on an intelligence level, right? What does the CIA director say to the Mossad chief in that situation?
Yeah, well, here, first of all, nobody was ever going to let me in that room. Right? So I was never, the director of the outfit never came and said, Mike, hey, I'm going to really need you here in this meeting.
Permission to speculate.
Yeah, exactly. So, look, a lot of it is just based on the credibility of your own intel, right? How good is it, right? And if it hasn't been corroborated or you believe there's some sourcing that's speculative, whatever, then you're going to lean a little more heavily into your liaison relationships, right? And you're going to take a little bit more on board, particularly, and again, look, the Israelis have filled in a lot of gaps for us over the years when it comes to the Iranians, right? As have others, the Saudis, Jordanians, and others. We've relied very heavily on partners for intel on Iran. It's always been a heavy lift. So those conversations, the interesting thing is government to government, we might see, the headlines will be talking about, it seems to be some rift developing between Trump and Netanyahu or Trump and Zelensky, right? The reality is on an intel level between the liaison partners, those relationships tend to be really tight because we're all in the same business, right? We're all in the same game. A lot of times our interests at that level, maybe not at the geopolitical level, White House to, government leader in some other place, but at the intel level, right, we understand, we've got similar objectives here. We're facing similar challenges.
And it can extend to even our adversaries, right? When we're working on counterterrorism stuff with Russia, there is a liaison for that, right?
There is a liaison for that, yeah. You have to be a little bit
It's a different relationship.
careful. It's a different relationship. But you have to be very pragmatic about what those relationships are like, right? And to be fair, look, do we tell the Brits everything? No. Do they tell us everything? No. But, you've got some very tight relations. And then, to your point, we live in the world that we live in, right? It's not the one that we hope to have. So, people complain about the Saudis, for instance. I'm saying, well, I'm sorry, right? In certain ways, do you have a better partner out there for us? Right? Or the Pakistanis, right? Very good in certain areas, really sketchy, or you got to be questionable in some others. So you have to be very pragmatic about these relationships, and you also can't be moralistic, right? So you can't. Again, it's not the world that you'd hope we live in. It's what we got, and so you just have to deal sometimes with the actors that are out there, and sometimes that rubs against the grain for folks who just want to live in a highly moral world. And I don't know what you get from that. It's like people who want to just draw the curtains around and say, well, we shouldn't be doing any of this crap overseas. You think, really? You don't think the world's interconnected? You don't think it's a shrinking globe? You think somehow we're going to act just in our own best interests, draw a curtain around the country and pretend like whatever happens over here isn't going to somehow impact us?
I wish we could.
Hey, that would no, don't get me wrong. Yeah. That would be lovely, right? That would be fantastic. But it's at least from my experience, that's not how it works.
So I'm sorry I interrupted you there, but when we talk about how our partners and the United States flush out kind of those differences, what do you again, permission to speculate on this? How do you actually reconcile those two things? Because one of the big reporting pieces that we've seen kind of come out over the course of the Iran war is not only the differences in the assessments between the Mossad and the CIA or the ODNI, but also the Mossad thought they were going to be much more capable of creating the pressure for regime collapse. There was that story that the CIA was preparing the Iraqi Kurds to invade from the west. I don't even know. I don't know if that was a double bluff from the CIA or not. But you know, you have all of these different wheels churning.
Yeah.
And you know, the Netanyahu comes in early February and says, "I think we can go forward with this." The Mossad chief was in Washington 5 days after that, or no, somewhere around that time. Point being, weeks later, we're in the war.
Yeah.
And background quotes reported in the New York Times. So again, for people at home, take it as you will. But Vance, Rubio, Ratcliffe, they were skeptical of what the Israelis were saying about their capacities to actually create kind of a regime collapse. How do you work out those types of issues, and what's your read on that entire situation?
Yeah, the answer is sometimes you don't. So whoever's the bigger dog, gets the say. Sometimes you fall back on, okay, well, why do you think that? Let's bring the analysts in, explain your intelligence, right, and they'll walk through in gruesome detail. Oftentimes what they've got, particularly in sort of that environment where the stakes are obviously very high. So you'll fall back on, again, the quality of the intelligence, right? And that will help guide those conversations. Now, obviously, someone like Ratcliffe or anybody who's the agency director will spend more time giving weight to the intel credibility than perhaps somebody sitting in the White House. They're going to be thinking a little bit more on the geopolitical terms, or there's a gut feeling, maybe whatever it might be. But there's no doubt that Netanyahu came into this with regime change as a primary driver. Right, that's what they wanted. The White House, I think, Washington in general is spooked by the phrase regime change. Right? Nobody likes to talk about it. Nobody wants to bring it up, right? It conjures up all sorts of problems from the past. And so I think they were – I think the White House was perhaps a little, in their own way, optimistic or overly optimistic because of the Venezuela experience, right? And I think there were some people that were willing to think that they could lay that same template over Iran and, oh, my God, look, we're going to get – maybe we're not going to call it regime change, but we're going to reshuffle the deck chairs and we're going to get a government we can work with, right? And that's just. Right?
And now you have to know that the guy on the ground in Iran working for the CIA does not think that at all.
No. There's no way. And I think if you had pulled in guys who had spent their careers, dealing in that part of the world and with Iran, that would have said no. You can kill a lot of these guys.
You're going to kill the cleric, and the IRGC is not going to become more powerful.
Yeah. Or they're not going to land on the Strait of Hormuz as their only leverage point. Of course they are, right? So I think there were certain obvious things, and I am, I try to be optimistic. So I'm sure that during the course of and I know for a fact that there were some briefings where it was clearly pointed out that the Strait of Hormuz would become the point here where it all came together. And I think that was, I don't want to say dismissed outright, but I think there was a willingness to imagine this was going to go better than it ever did. I'm shocked that they didn't have contingency plans well in advance for the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, they thought, and I think you're right about that they believed that they were going to neuter the regime so much that it wasn't going to be a problem.
Yeah.
The problem is when you laid out those 3 war aims, February 28th in the morning, Trump releases that video statement where he says nuclear, ballistic missiles, and
proxies.
Proxies, terrorism, / this is your time to overthrow this ugly regime, Iranian people, and even says to the Iranians, "You've never had a president like me before." It's hilarious. But when you make that third ask for the people to overthrow the regime, you have made it an existential threat to the regime. And so they're going to, as you said, fall back on the Strait of Hormuz as that main point of leverage.
Well, and they just finished slaughtering, the month before, thousands and thousands and thousands of their own citizens, right? And it wasn't the first time they've killed their own people. So you already knew what you were dealing with, and you know that there's, from their perspective, the fact that they're still in existence, right? They've won. I'm talking about the existing regime.
Oh, 100%.
And that talk about the puzzled me, but I understood what they were trying to do with that narrative about how they're dealing with a new government. It's the Islamic Republic. It's the same regime, just different faces, right? And those faces are more intense. They're harder in terms of their viewpoints. I would argue that Mojtaba Khamenei is basically just nothing more than a rubber stamp at this point. And I think
he was always the IRGC guy.
Yeah,
Like that's why there was first Ayatollah Khamenei thought he didn't want the position to be hereditary.
Mm-hmm.
This was not some fait accompli that Mojtaba would be
Right.
the Ayatollah.
Right.
That he was concerned about that. He also was concerned that the kid just doesn't seem that interested in theology. And he was always kind of more involved with the militarism of the IRGC. And that is actually, like, that's the thing that makes me more afraid of the Iranians than less afraid. Like, the clerics are scary and radical for sure.
Yeah.
The IRGC, that is, I think, the big baddie, right? And so when you say he's just a rubber stamp, to me, I look and I see, oh, the IRGC's has a stronger hold on the country than it did before the war began. Also, with the protests, those protests in which the Iranians absolutely slaughtered, how many people were not quite clear. 30,000 is the estimate or something like that. No surprise there that they did that. But those protests were led by the merchant class, by the Bazaris.
Yeah, it started out by that.
It started out that way.
Yeah.
And the Bazaris also look at the government for a handout and a hand up. And so when you're saying that actually we're going to get that same level of engagement in the streets to overthrow the regime when the Bazaris aren't involved, good luck. Because the Bazaris at the end of the day are in an arrangement where they're the most powerful economic actors in the country, and they don't want to upset the boat too much. Right?
No, and they were just trying to make a point, and then they gained some momentum with the protests, and then it sort of just shifted a little bit, and there was a moment where you thought this could actually happen, and then of course the regime came out and shot them all, and that's pretty powerful incentive to in the future stay home and not go out on the streets. So people who are saying, well, where are the Iranian people? How come they don't come out? Look what we're doing for them. You think, like, really? They don't have the guns. The security apparatus is still out there. They're out there at nighttime patrolling the streets, right, warning people. They came right out and said early on, if you come out in the streets, we're going to kill you, right? So, and they mean it, and the people know they mean it. So you can't expect them to suddenly rise up just because the bombs are falling, right? You're never going to change that regime by dropping bombs, right? You're going to end up with, again, new faces, but you're not going to like what they think. And so what I worry about with this outcome is, I mean, President Trump has already, refused this last proposal from the Iranians was, no surprise, was ridiculous. There's a list of demands on their part because they think they've won. Right, and they understand domestic U.S. politics. They've been watching this a long time. They know the pressure that's building with the midterm elections. They know the president's keen to get the hell out of this. Right, they're probably reading that he's got, he's losing attention. Right, kind of like what happened with Ukraine. That's a whole nother story. And so, I think the concern here is that we're just going to take the nuclear issue, and in an effort to get a deal, we're just going to kick that down the road, right? And somebody else can deal with that, just like we've been doing all this time. Every administration's putting lipstick on a pig. So I worry that in an effort to get the hell out, get prices dropped. Look, I mean, how bizarre is this world, right? We eased up sanctions on the Russians, on oil for the Russians, because we're trying to keep prices at the pump down so we don't piss off voters. Right? How bizarre is this? Right? It's a fascinating world if you think about it. It's sad in a way, but
it's when the domestic starts to dominate the international. Because, I mean, it's for people who operate on the geostrategic side, it's a blessing and a curse, right? You live in a good Republican regime, but you also have to deal with the fact that the domestic calculations always get a vote.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you. You mentioned like these people they're not going to come out after that type of repression. There is this narrative amongst people who are very pro-war with Iran. They want the president to quote-unquote finish the job. What that particularly means, we're not exactly sure.
Right. Yeah.
Does that mean finish off the nuclear program? Does that mean finish off the entire freaking thing? We don't know. But they are saying we need to arm the people. And there is this bizarre Like, I don't know if they think that if they actually think that these are good examples to cite, or if they think their audiences are ignorant of the history here. But they cite Nicaragua, Angola, and Afghanistan as examples of when this has succeeded.
Yeah, succeeded?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And I look at the situation, I say, well, Ortega is in charge in Nicaragua, in Angola.
What's
that
old
led
is
to
new
a
again.
30-year civil war. And
Let me think about Afghanistan.
how did that end up? Oh, the Taliban's still in control, and the Mujahideen, there was this guy in the Mujahideen called Osama bin Laden, right? Like there is this narrative that if only we were to arm the people, this could work out. One, what do you make of this line of argument? Two, if these people brought you in and said, Mike, how would we make this work? What would you even, like, could you even make that work? Is that even possible?
Yeah, I heard that. I heard that very argument today before the show with some pundits who just were cavalier about it. He's got to finish the job. I'm tired of this. You know, we can't have this ridiculous back and forth, and the Iranians think they've won, and so we just got to finish the job. And nobody said, well, how are you going to do that? And then somebody else in the same panel was like, yeah, and we've got to get that uranium. That's what we just had to go get it. Thinking, have you ever? I knew the answer, but they've never had their boots on the ground in a hostile environment. You want to go in, you want to talk about a complex operation, right? Where you're talking about being on the ground for weeks, right? With excavators, first of all.
Operation Sapphire took 6 weeks.
Yeah,
in the Soviet
this is going to be unbelievable, and so. I get it. People are frustrated, right? Because I think they imagined, and in part the messaging indicated as such, that this was going to be a quick turnaround, right? And so people's expectations were up here. They thought this was going to be somehow easier than it was. They imagined, a lot of people were hoping, and rightly so. I was hoping, right? Everybody wants this regime gone. I want this regime gone, right? They deserve every bit of ass kicking that they get for everything they've done to the Iranian people over all these years and the number of Americans they've killed and everything. And so I have no problems with that. But you also have to be pragmatic, right? And you have to assess these things at the outset. And I'm afraid that they didn't necessarily do that in terms of how difficult this was going to be and what they were going to likely end up with. I think they had people briefing them on that. I don't think they were paid attention to. So if you were to say, okay, we got to finish the job, so how are you going to do it? Well, it's not going to be by airdropping weapons to the citizens of Iran, right? Arming the people of Iran. It's not going to be by hoping that a small number of Kurds in the West are going to somehow march on Tehran, right? Not going to happen. So, and you can't affect this regime change just through munitions, right? So how do you do it? You're going to have to be more patient, and you're going to have to completely turn the tap off on anything that goes into that country, right? What does that mean? That's a terrible...
That is famine. That is
bad, right? That is really bad. And they're going to pass the regime. You know, they don't give a shit about the people, right? You've already seen that. How many thousands do they kill? So they're going to pass that pain down to the Iranian people. So it's a very unsatisfactory answer. But I think it's... If you're just talking from a very pragmatic point of view, how would you do it? I would do it through the economic pressure that you've got to be serious about. Right? That means you got to get serious with China. You got to sit there in front of them during the summit and explain what you're going to do and say, I don't care whether you like it or not, but this is what we're going to do. And Xi Jinping respects power, respects authority, right? Respects a very direct approach, right? But again, that's another topic. So I think you have to go after every little bit of revenue that regime can have. That means, in part, yes, a lot of pain for the Iranian people, and that's a terrible thing, right, because they've suffered a lot. But I think also it means that you would have to have the patience that I don't think this administration has, or any administration, coming up on an election, right? That's the primary driver here, right? So if you're talking about 6 months, right, of sustained, brutal economic pressure to get this regime to finally fracture, crack, and fall apart. That's 6 months leading up to the midterm elections where gas prices undoubtedly keep going up.
Right. The Iranians are starving. They have it worse, but we have $6 a gallon.
Yeah, or $7, right, or $8. And so so the point being is I don't think that's going to happen because I don't think they've got the political will and patience to do it. But you're not going to do it by this bizarre concept of arming the Iranian people, right? Or just dropping more bombs.
We've covered a lot of ground. We've covered the deep state, becoming a CIA agent. So anyone using this who actually becomes a CIA agent, let us know.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground. And you mentioned in your final response there where this thing is going, you mentioned China. Everyone agrees in Washington that the long-term threat to the United States is great power competition between China. Final thoughts on what this means for this, what has been called an unspoken Cold War between China and the United States, how Iran, Israel, U.S. war affects that in the coming months and years potentially.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I think we view the relationship with China different than they do. I think they look at us and they already think they're at war with us, right? And I don't think we like to use that term, and maybe we use a Cold War to some degree, but we don't even like to say they're an adversary, right? We always dance around and say, well, they're a very important partner, and there's a lot of ways. And yes, that's great. And we're always, of course, we're just talking about the Chinese regime. We're not talking about the Chinese people, the history, or whatever. It's a fantastic place. But I think you've got the summit coming up between Trump and Xi Jinping, and they're going to be, you would think, talking about a wide range of things, right? I'm sure Xi will bring up Taiwan if Trump doesn't. Do I think that if Xi views bringing Taiwan back into the fold as his big legacy move, then that will happen sometime before he steps away, right? And then, so now you have to spend all your time, and that's what intelligence analysts do. They spend a lot of time assessing Xi's relationship with the people around him and the party and his generals, which he's had some trouble with. And so I think there's a great deal to be looked at there in terms of if you want to read the tea leaves as to the issue with Taiwan, which will be the next really big flashpoint perhaps, then you have to look at it from more of a personal perspective. What's Xi's health like, right? How long does he maintain his grip on power, right? When does he see himself walking off into the sunset? Because then you could say, well, the move on Taiwan, in what other fashion, maybe a soft approach, maybe more of a kinetic approach, will happen during that time frame. The Iran conflict, I think Xi will do exactly what they always do, which he'll talk about, we just want peace. The nations need to get along. It'll be a lot of, just talking about nothing. I don't think anything's, I tend to be very cynical when it comes to summits, investigations in Washington, committee hearings. I'm a real cynic that anything ever really gets done of substance during these big moments or events, right? Everything happens behind the scenes. So we'll see. But you're right. China is the player to watch, right? There's no doubt about it. I think Russia, it'd be lovely to talk about Russia, Ukraine, sometime, because that is at a fascinating moment right now, right? We've taken our eye off the ball because we're tired of it, right? Zelensky is, I think, feeling better about that. They're not quite as desperate for U.S. munitions and weaponry as they were. And so and again, I always thought we had more envoys. I didn't know we only had two envoys. We've got Steve Witkoff and we've got Jared Kushner. They're everywhere.
Keep the family close.
Keep them, yeah, exactly. So they're everywhere. I suspect they're mediating divorces around the country as well. But I think it's like Zelensky's probably saying, well, how about us? Yeah, but I don't think he cares as much anymore. So, but China's the one to watch. Iran, I don't think we're going to get out of that, as quickly as the White House would like. And I think it's going to be messy, and I think it's going to be very unsatisfactory. In that, I think we're going to give them some concessions. They're going to end up with assets unfrozen and delivered to them in an effort to open up the strait. I think the Iranians have gone from saying, this is what we want, to the strait is now under our control. So you may see a sea change in the way that they view what used to be freedom of navigation. So now they're going to set up a toll system like the Pennsylvania Turnpike. I mean, it's a bizarre, messy situation that I don't think is going to end with people saying, "Oh, that was worth it." because I do think they're going to kick that nuclear issue down the road, unfortunately.
Well, in a world of intense threats and increasing chaos, we'll continue to listen to the President's Daily Brief podcast to keep our eye on the ball. Mike Baker.
Thank you, man.
Thank you for coming on the Signal Sit Down.
I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sit Down. If you liked what you heard here today, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever before you go. And we love your feedback. It really does help the show. So please remember to leave us a review and comment who you'd like to see on future episodes of the Signal Sit Down. It's because of your support and your interest and your engagement that allows us to continue this incredibly fun work. And together, we'll continue to expose how Washington really works and affect real change. We'll see you next time on the Signal Sit Down.